the secretary could call the roll, please.
Chairperson Hadaway,
Present.
Vice Chair Providenti, Commissioner Jones, Commissioner Sonata, Commissioner Varner.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you. Item B is public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment on or discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the Carson City Debt Management Commission. I see no public, so we will go on to item C, approval of minutes, February 8th, 2022. Each of you received a copy of that document. Unless there is any suggested changes, I would entertain a motion to approve. There's a motion and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Item D for possible action is discussion and possible action regarding annual reports, statements of debt management policy, plans for capital improvement, and update of information as required by NRS 350.013. First item is Carson City. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. John Peterson is here from J&A Consulting to help present this. He does put this together every year for us.
Good afternoon, John Peterson with J&A Consulting Group. Appreciate the opportunity to present. Just maybe a book or housekeeping item. The city does have an item later on the agenda for the request to issue up to $5.55 million of bonds. I will review the city's debt policy and would like to incorporate my comments on the policy into that presentation rather than duplicate it twice, I'm sure, for for time's sake.
That's fine.
That's what I'd like to do. So I guess first thing, opening up regarding the city's debt, and this is in the board packet on page 11 of the packet, the executive summary. As of June 30, 2022, the city has $149,607,785 of general obligation debt outstanding. The city also has $9,516,700 of revenue bonds that are outstanding. And finally, the city has $3,699,538 in installment purchase obligations outstanding, all as of June 30, 2022. As I just previously mentioned, we are planning to request from the Debt Management Commission approval to issue up to $5,550,000 of general obligation infrastructure sales tax bonds, and that will be a later item today. One item that I think is very important when looking at the city's debt is that the majority of the city's general obligation debt is paid from its utility systems, from the water fund, the wastewater fund. I will stop calling it the sewer fund one of these days. The water fund, the wastewater fund, and the stormwater fund. That's 67% of the outstanding debt. And the reason that those bonds, they are secured by the pledged revenues of those systems. The reason that they were issued as GO bonds is because it helps reduce the interest rate and therefore gives cost of service savings to the citizens here in Carson City. As of June 30, 2022, the city has approximately $138 million of statutory debt limit available. And again, that's a statutory formula. The city's debt limit is 15% of the assessed value. Does not mean that there's any plan to issue $138 million of debt. It's just one of those items that we have to look at anytime there's a proposal to issue GO debt. I'd next like to turn over to page 3 of the packet. This is page 16 of the board book. Just a quick comment about the historic outstanding GO debt. 2019 was our high water mark at just over $181 million. As of June 30, 2022, again, we're down to $149,600,000. So a good reduction in the outstanding debt over the last 4 fiscal years. And there is a chart at the bottom of that page that shows the projection over the next 10 years of the city's outstanding GO debt, and that does include the proposal that we'll talk about later today for the infrastructure bonds. On the following page, we have a chart showing the debt service requirements, principal and interest for the city's outstanding bonds. And at the bottom of that page, we have a pie chart showing just the makeup of the various general obligation bonds and how those bonds are repaid, whether it's from utility services, special sales taxes, consolidated taxes, or other revenues. Next, I'd like to turn to talk about the medium-term general obligation bonds. There's $6,516,000 of those bonds currently outstanding. And there's a table on page 6 of the presentation showing the various revenues that are being used by the city to repay those bonds, including the stormwater fund, the water fund, the 911 surcharge fund, et cetera. And the sum of those funds that are available to pay those bonds are approximately $19 to $20 million over the last 2 fiscal years and the budget for 2023. The annual debt service in that same time frame is presented at the bottom of that table. So sufficient revenues to pay those medium-term bonds. Proposed, the city is looking to issue $5,550,000 of infrastructure sales tax bonds. Pending approval by the Debt Management Commission, those bonds would likely be issued in early calendar 2023. We have a pro forma debt service schedule on page 7 showing the proposed debt service or pro forma debt service, on those bonds. It would be a 15-year obligation. Currently, that interest rate is estimated at 5%. And I don't want to steal Sherry's thunder, but the municipal advisor is very conservative when he puts these interest rates together. We don't think we'd be anywhere near 5%. Currently, we think the interest rate is probably closer to 3.25% to 3.5%. But because the bonds won't be issued for several months, we wanted to err on the side of caution. Next, there's several pages talking about the affordability of various bonds, and I'll kind of group these into 2 categories. Bonds that are paid from sales taxes, such as the 0.25% quality of life tax here in Carson City, the 0.1% infrastructure tax, the 0.1% V&T tax, and as well as the consolidated tax. And maybe just quickly walking through those for quality of life. This is at the top of page 8. There's $4,640,000 of those bonds outstanding. Debt service runs through 2030. And at the top of page 9, we have a coverage table showing those quality of life sales taxes being collected, the pledge that's applicable to the bonds. And in every year, we have more than sufficient coverage from that pledge revenues, over 2 times coverage in every year. So that's a good sign. It shows that if there is any kind of economic downturn, that those bonds are protected, that they will be paid, and there will not be a need to impose a property tax by the city. Next, on page 10 is the infrastructure sales tax bonds. Currently outstanding $11,885,000. Debt service running through fiscal year 2045. And again, on page 11, looking at the coverage ratio based on that pledged revenue, about $1.9 million a year of pledged revenues. Annual debt service currently $775,000 per year, so those coverage ratios of about 2.5. When we overlay the proposed bonds on top of that, that debt service coverage would be about 1.4 to 1.5 times for fiscal years 22 and 23. And just also want to point out that sales tax collections year to date for fiscal 22 are up just over 2.5% versus fiscal 21. We should get the final tax revenue for fiscal 22, I assume next week when Department of Taxation releases that report. Consolidated tax debt service is next. This is page 12. City currently has $26,450,000 of outstanding consolidated tax bonds. This does include $8.1 million of C-tax bonds that were issued in March. That was a bond issue that was approved by the Debt Management Commission last fall. Just wanted to report that at that the interest rate that we assumed when we requested that approval was 4%. The actual interest rate on those bonds was 3.38%. So came in under the estimates. And again, looking at page 13, we show annual coverage of just over 2 times in fiscal years 22 and 23, and that includes the $8.1 million that was issued. The next page 14, are room tax secured bonds. These are bonds that are paid by room taxes that are received by the Convention and Tourism Authority. There's $395,000 of bonds outstanding. This is the final year of those bonds, and they will be paid off. And at the bottom of page 14, we can show that more than sufficient coverage to repay those bonds. 0.1% V&T sales tax bonds, currently outstanding $3,775,000 with debt service running through fiscal year 26. And again, looking at the bottom of page 15, more than adequate coverage of 1.8 times. And that takes me through all of the sales tax bonds. I'll just pause and see if there are any questions on the sales tax bonds before I move into the utility fund bonds.
Any-
Thank you. As of June 30, 2022, the city currently has $50,331,191 of outstanding GO debt secured by the water fund. That includes a $7 million bond that was issued in March that was approved by the Debt Commission last fall. Again, we estimated 4% interest on that bond. The actual rate on those bonds was 3.55%. At the same time, when we issued those bonds, we also refinanced $9.7 million of outstanding water bonds for interest savings, did not increase debt service in any year, did not extend the final payment. Actual savings on that refinancing were $650,000. So just wanted to point that out if folks are trying to compare any of these schedules to what was in last year's report. Looking at the top of page 17 where we have the debt service coverage, again, these are secured by the net pledge revenues of the water fund, which is operating revenues plus connection fees, and it excludes cash operating expenses such as salaries and services and supplies. $9.3 million is the budgeted pledged revenue in 2023, and that compares very favorably to the $4.6 million of outstanding debt service, of 2 times coverage there. At the bottom of 17, we also have $1,883,000 of outstanding medium-term bonds. We talked a little bit about these earlier in the presentation. These bonds aren't secured by the water fund, but it's the city's intent to pay these bonds from the water fund. And so really where that comes into play is the next page on 18, where we show the combined debt service of both the secured bonds and the unsecured bonds of, between 1.6 and 2.3 times over the next 10 years. So again, more than enough funds to pay for these bonds. Looking at the next page on 19, talking about the wastewater fund, $40,390,922 are currently outstanding. This does include the city refinanced $1.9 million of wastewater bonds in March of 2021, saved approximately $75,000 in debt service by doing that. So that includes that refinancing. Over on page 20, again, more than sufficient coverage based on the pledged revenues of the sewer fund, the wastewater fund, excuse me. And then finally on the wastewater fund, there are $608,000 of medium-term bonds, again, not secured by the revenues, but the city anticipates paying for them. And on page 22, again, we show the overall affordability of the wastewater fund debt from its revenues, more than 2 times coverage of all of that debt service. So very good position to be in on those. And finally, with the utilities is the stormwater fund, $5,224,673 of bonds are outstanding as of June 30. That debt service runs through fiscal year 2038. We did not issue any stormwater bonds in fiscal 22. Again, looking at coverage on just those bonds, more than 2 times coverage over the last couple of years and budgeted for fiscal 23. And when we add in the $1,221,000 of medium-term bonds that were issued for stormwater purpose projects, you can see that coverage on page 25 of the packet that shows more than sufficient coverage to pay for those bonds. The debt service on the stormwater fund is somewhat front-loaded over the next 3 fiscal years, and afterwards, those old bonds, which primarily is a bond going back to 2005, are paid off. And so we see far less debt service beginning in fiscal year 2026. Page 26, this is the city's debt limit. This is a statutory requirement. The city's debt limit is 15% of its assessed value. And basically what we do is we take that formula, the assessed value times 15%, and then we subtract the outstanding general obligation bonds. So as of June 30, 2022, the city has approximately $138 million of available debt limit. Again, not a plan to issue that amount of bonds, but that is something we will look at later on with the proposed bond for the infrastructure fund. Page 27 is a geo-debt comparison. Oh, excuse me, before I get into that, any questions on the utility funds?
Don't see any? Go ahead.
Thank you. Getting onto page 27, this is a comparison of similar entities across the state in terms of the city's outstanding debt. It's debt as a percentage of assessed value. Carson City traditionally comes in higher than most other entities when we're looking at this, and primarily this is because the city, as a consolidated entity, there aren't other overlapping governments that would issue bonds on some of these projects and therefore would have their own debt limit. For instance, if we want to look at Washoe County, there are bonds issued by Tumwa, bonds issued by the fire protection districts in both Lake Tahoe and in Reno, City of Reno, City of Sparks. They all have their own debt limits. They all issue their own bonds, and so these numbers don't quite interpret that. But again, these are bonds that are paid by various revenues across the city. The city does not levy any property taxes to directly pay bonds. And I think the last point that I wanted to make in terms of the debt policy was that when the city issued its bonds in March, and I really want to give a big shout of praise to Sherry and her staff and for the Board of Supervisors. The city's bond ratings were upgraded by both S&P and Moody's. The city now has a AA rating from S&P and a AA3 rating from Moody's. So congratulations to them. And really the bond ratings are an indication of how the rating agencies, their outside opinions in terms of credit worthiness, but how they view the city's performance, especially during and post-COVID. Sherry, I'll pause.
I really want to thank you, John, for all the work you do on this debt policy and helping me issue these bonds. It is very much appreciated, as well as Ryan Henry from Sherman Howard. Very much appreciated.
John Peterson, for the record. That concludes my comments on the debt policy. I guess for the other documents that have been submitted today, there is an indebtedness report. That's a state form that's required. So basically, this is information that mirrors what's already in the debt policy. So that's included. We also have information for the capital improvement plan for both the city as well as an indebtedness report and capital improvement plan for the Carson City Redevelopment Authority. And I will just pause and see if there are any. Did not intend to cover those in detail, but see if there are any questions.
Are there any questions on any of those documents? Okay, John, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Do we take action to accept on each one of these, or can we wait until the school district gives their
I
presentation?
think they're agendized separately, so
Okay.
you want to take a motion on each.
Okay, I will take a motion to accept the documents that have been presented by the city pursuant to statute.
I'll go ahead and make that motion that we accept the documents submitted.
Second.
There's been a motion and second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. School Superintendent / Finance Director / Chief Janitor, welcome and congratulations. Or condolences, as the case may be.
Thank you, Mr. Hadaway. I'm joined by my new partner in crime that has replaced me here, Mr. Spencer Windward, who you will grow more familiar with over the years here, representing the Carson City School District. So excited to have him. And John, are you going to come up and do?
Sure, I can do yours.
No, it's okay. Just kidding. Okay. So anyway, so thank you, but thanks for having us back. Our presentation is not quite as complicated as the cities in these matters, as you well know. One of the things I wanted just to point out, and it comes up in the executive summary, but we had been here some years back and had been approved for issuing up to $40 million. We have issued some of that, but not all of that. And because I wanted to point out, because it says that we do not expect that we will be issuing any debt here in the next year. And I think as of some months ago, that probably was the expectation. I would say where we are now, we're going to be getting back into some facilities master planning because of some changes within our capital improvement plan. And so I'll discuss those a little bit later, but that potentially could still happen this year, I think later this year, but and it may be more likely than not. So I just wanted to point that out before we got too far down the road. So as as John mentioned, we also have our indebtedness report, and I'm not really going to reference that because it really just seems to suck information out of the debt management policy. So we'll just stick to that here. The district altogether at this point has about 66.5 million in outstanding debt. Going back to a school improvement bond in 2012. We've done lots of refundings over that time. One of the school improvement bonds we did in 2020 was actually paying off a medium-term obligation that the district had, doing some energy efficiency projects similar to the ones that the city has done over the prior years. But doing that helped remove some pressure off our general fund as our school finance formula and model have changed to the detriment of the district. So we're trying to ease up some of the burden that was on our general fund with some of those projects. That debt and the interest on it is paid by a 43-cent tax levy. You may know the district, school districts had available to them in 2010 to put a question to voters regarding, or to pass was known, we call it a rollover bond. And in the process of doing that, we dropped our debt service levy from 47 cents down to 43 cents. So that was passed. It was good until the year 2020, but in, I believe, the year 2015, it got extended another 10 years to 2030, and then 2 sessions ago, I think, or the last session, it got extended to 2035. So that rollover bond, we reduced the debt service tax levy to 43 cents, and we can continue using that to pay for projects as they become known to us to deal with. Page 4, just wanted to note that the reserve that we have in this fund is in our debt service fund is well within required amounts. We must have 50% of the amount of principal and interest payment due in a given year, and we are currently at about 90% at the end of this year. We're expecting to have an ending fund balance of about $7 million. And the expenses in the fund at this point were about $7 million. So we are in good shape, and clearly in that respect, there is some room, given though, if you look at the level of revenue also on that page versus expenses, there is some room for us to potentially bond again here in the near future if we would need to. On the next page, page 5, I just wanted to note that although there's no way we would ever do it, the available general obligation debt limit of almost $210 million, that amount, and just to put that in perspective for it, that sounds like a lot of money. That would actually not build you a high school based on what's going on up in Washoe County. They're well over $200 million right now for the new high schools that they are building. So that is probably not something we will be doing anytime in the near future. Bond rating. So if you go to page 10, just wanted to mention this. So the Carson City School District actually had the highest bond rating in the state until about a year and a half ago, I believe it was. And Moody's has adjusted their methodology as to how they rate, I guess, government entities, but particularly it hit school districts hard. And John works with Marty Johnson, who you may be familiar with, and I have not ever seen Marty Johnson get really upset, and he about blew a gasket on a phone call when this happened, because it didn't have anything to do, going from AA2 to AA3, it didn't have anything to do with any change in the district's financial position. It had everything to do with the weightings within the methodology, their formula, basically, and really it came down to PERS and what they believe is our obligation to PERS, even though it's not exactly our obligation. So that was a bummer, but we move on. So last thing I wanted to just point out, If you go to the last page, just our capital improvement plan, just so you're aware, and as questions may come up in the community, you'll notice about, I don't know, a third of the way down the page under the expenditures, there's a line there in blue, or it says district-wide major maintenance, and in blue, 4.9 million. And next to that, 1.4 million. That represents funds, and this is where we're getting back into our facilities master planning process. So that represents funds that had initially been set aside for the 1600 Snyder property, the former Capital Christian property. As you may know, another entity has now purchased or leased that property, so it's no longer available. So there were some funds that we had set aside, and I just changed the name to district-wide major maintenance from what we had estimated as a purchase price and some work to be done on the building. So now we are going back to the drawing board, and we have my operations and capital projects guys are really excited because they have lots of ideas of things that we could do with that money. So there's some further definition that will come over the next months with how we will use some of those funds. And in that process, again, we may learn that and I know we will learn there's more that we need to do in the school district with some of our facilities. They are aging pretty rapidly in some cases. So that likely will be added in soon. The other thing I'll just mention, the Eagle Valley Middle School expansion project has been completed just in the nick of time because school just started. But that is a fabulous addition. I would encourage you, I think in the month of September, we're planning on doing kind of a community open house to come in and view it. And it really is, it's just a beautiful space that not only there's a lot of glass and taking in the amazing views overlooking the valley back there, but what they've done in those classrooms to make them a little more interactive and making much more use of the space is pretty incredible. And some of the what we call STEM labs, science, technology, engineering, mathematics labs, are just incredible. And if I was in 8th grade, I'd be really happy. My son is in 8th grade, he's really happy. So I'd encourage you to check that out if you get a chance. But with that, I'm done. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Any questions? Thanks, AJ.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hadaway.
At this time, I would entertain a motion to accept the Carson City School District's reports.
So moved.
Mary moved,
Second.
Nick second. Are there any questions, comments, observations? All those in favor say aye. 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 Thank you. Okay, item E is discussion and possible action on resolution concerning submission to the Carson City Debt Management Commission by Carson City, Nevada, proposed to issue general obligation infrastructure and sales tax bonds, additionally secured by pledged revenues in the aggregate amount, pledged amount not to exceed $5,550,000, and approving certain details connected therewith. Okay.
Hello, this is Sherry Russell, CFO for the record. So this is the second bond of hopefully 3 that we'll end up issuing. We've been talking about this since we implemented this infrastructure tax back in 2014. It's for another one of the corridor projects. So it's the William Street corridor that we're asking for this money for. And as John talked about earlier, I think we definitely have the ability to pay for these bonds. So if you have any further questions.
And the third one was North Carson Street, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And that should be a couple years down the road, so.
Right. John, you have any questions or observations?
John Peterson with J&A Consulting Group for the record. Just a couple of observations. One, this is not the final step in issuing these bonds. Earlier this month, the city adopted what's called a Debt Management Commission Notice Resolution, which is what brings us here today to request this approval from the commission. If approved, we will go back to the Board of Supervisors in September to adopt what's called a Resolution of Intent. That will kick off essentially a 90-day petition period. It's a waiting period before the city can issue those bonds. During that 90-day period, the city will hold a public hearing. That will be noticed in the paper. And upon completion of that petition period, and after the public hearing has been held, we will come back to the Board of Supervisors to adopt the bond ordinance. That is expected sometime in January or February of 2023. And as Sherry mentioned, the presentation material, we walked through some of this already in the prior item. The only differences I will note between this material and what was in the prior item is that the outstanding debt balances are somewhat different because one of them is as of June 30, 2022. The other is as of August 4th, 2022. So there are some bonds that pay in that period. And also the assessed value of the city changes July 1st because of the new fiscal year. So those are the fundamental differences between the information in those two items. But that's all I have and would request approval from the commission. And happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of John? By the way, Sherry, thank you for your staff reports. They are very helpful.
You're
Okay,
welcome.
I
Sorry
will-
you never had them before. I kind of didn't realize that when we were putting this together.
Yeah. I will entertain a motion on Resolution 2022 DMCR-1. Read the whole title.
Sure, I'll do it. I move to approve Resolution 2022-DMC-R-1, resolution concerning the submission to the Carson City Debt Management Commission by Carson City, Nevada, of a proposal to issue general obligation infrastructure sales tax bonds additionally secured by pledged revenues in the aggregate principal amount not to exceed $5,550,000 and improving certain details in connection therewith.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, item F, discussion and possible action regarding the percentage of limitation on total ad valorem tax levy as required by NRS 350-0155. And you have a staff report there that indicates that we have, at least since I've been on here, moved that it be a 90% limit.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and make a motion to set the percentage of limitation on total ad valorem tax levy at 90%.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Richard seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Item G is the discussion and possible action regarding priorities among essential and non-essential facilities and services as required by NRS 350-0155. Again, we have traditionally set the public safety, education, and health as the priorities for bonds.
I'll just go ahead and make a motion to set the priorities among essential facilities and services as public safety being first, education second, and health third.
Do I have a second? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Okay, you all have a calendar. We have normally met the second or third Tuesday of February. Does anyone have any, I don't even know what's happening that far in advance, but does anyone have a problem with, let's hit the middle, the 14th of February? Is there any Board of Supervisor meetings or anything else that we know of that's might conflict? Okay, well then let's set, is 1:30 on the 14th okay with everybody? February 14th. Oh, yeah, well, I'll make sure the meeting is short. Okay. Okay, item I is the public is invited at this time to comment on any matter that is not specifically included in the agenda as an action item. No action may be taken on the matter raised under this item of the agenda. And there is no public, so we will move to adjourn, and unless there's any issue with that, I will move that we adjourn. Okay, thank you all for coming.